What should we think about the increase in mass shootings that have been plaguing the United States? Are there any real-world solutions that might actually work? The horrible carnage in Uvalde, Texas is stomach-churning, but it's only the latest in a series of active shooter crimes that are increasing with unnerving frequency. The shock and grief of these tragedies cannot be understated. But what can we do about this? In a deep study reported in the Los Angeles Times, as well as elsewhere, criminologists Jillian Peterson and James Densley laid out 4 consistent features common to nearly all mass shooters. They are, number 1, each had experienced early childhood trauma and exposure to violence at a young age. This includes parental abuse, suicide, domestic violence, and bullying. Secondly, each experienced an identifiable crisis point, making them angry or depressed prior to the shooting. Third, each studied other shooters and sought validation or notoriety for their motives, many times through social media. And lastly, all had the means to carry out their plans. Now, while much of the political talk and media talk are focused on one aspect of that 4th point, that is, gun control legislation, I think the first 3 areas need a little bit more attention, as they center on foundational aspects of our society: family, community, and a shared set of virtues. First, let's talk about unraveling the family. The primary building block of any society is family. Biology dictates that a man and a woman join together, as only that coupling can produce children. Offspring, then, reinforce the connection of the man and the woman when each seeks their progeny's protection and welfare. Today, however, things have changed. Marriage seems less about what happens to future generations and more about self-fulfillment. Traditional motherhood roles are dismissed as backwards or stifling, and children are looked upon more as the latest accessory. The trends in intentional single motherhood, homosexual couples using sperm donors, or even the surrogacy trend to make babies exemplifies such an attitude. We have to ask ourselves, where were the parents of this latest shooter? How come nobody is talking about them and their responsibility? Do their actions have an effect upon his? Of course they do. Secondly, we're losing real community. Humans seek community. We're hardwired as communal beings, sharing life and experience with others who can support and reinforce each of us physically, emotionally, and spiritually. But a true community, well, that requires real-life face-to-face interactions over an extended period of time. Long-term interactions with others will teach you about the imperfections of people and how we can love them anyway. It's a sharing experience over time that deepens our relationship with one another. And it is the relationships that hold true meaning. However, society today is really speeding in the opposite direction. Our hyper-individualism that the current culture celebrates, well, that's antithetical to community building. And social media, that just gives one the illusion of connectedness, but without all the messy and time-consuming face-to-face stuff. Yet, churches used to be the center of community building. Now, many still function that way, but they're not valued as such by the larger culture. It's no wonder that the U.S. has become a nation of lonely people, and it's no surprise that both suicide and drug addiction are becoming epidemics. Lastly, we're abandoning virtue. In his book, Culture Counts, Faith and Feeling in a World Besieged, philosopher Roger Scruton defines civilization as, quote, a social entity that manifests religious, political, legal, and customary uniformity over an extended period, and which confers on its members the benefits of socially accumulated knowledge. But what if a society abandoned the idea that socially accumulated knowledge is real knowledge? I mean, if virtue and morality are relative instead of absolute, then they don't qualify as knowledge, and they certainly cannot be passed down. Everyone has to find truth for themselves. Yeah, you see, we're losing the benefits of our former shared Judeo-Christian civilization because we're abandoning absolute morality. Without a foundational baseline, well, college students experience higher rates of sexual assaults. Even Wallet students hold that rape can somehow be justified. Pitram Sorokin rightly predicted that a culture driven by feelings instead of an understanding of innate truths will ultimately fail. Now, realize that I'm not saying that everyone in our cultural climate is going to become a mass shooter. I don't believe that any more than I believe everyone is going to become a rapist. But when the constraints that make killing or rape much more difficult are taken away, well, then it shouldn't be a surprise to see more of those types of actions. Because the United States is a gun culture, mass shooters have access to guns. But that alone doesn't make one a mass shooter. The other three ingredients need to be there too. Well, in prior generations, more people owned guns as a percentage of the population, and the Washington Post reports that gun ownership is actually near a 40-year low. No, it's society that's changed. And the results? Well, they've been explosive, to say the least. I'm Lenny Esposito with Come Reason Ministries.